Our OIC ASDS, Dr. Ellie S. Ubaldo, and ASDS, Dr. Criselda Ocang, our workaholic PSDS, Dr. Kandra E. Penoliar, our GAD District Coordinator, Dr. Elvira Del Jo, my fellow school heads na sa loob ng 3 araw ay naranasan natin ang maging isang doktor. Mga masisipag na guro na nagmula sa mababang paaralan ng Bulawit, Parang, Tabu Sili, Lucab Sur, Lucab Norte, Lucab Este, George de Vera at Puchucan. Isang magandang umaga po sa lahat. For our gender and development training, I am going to discuss the sexual harassment in a work-related education or training environment. This is based on Republic Act 7877, otherwise known as the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995. What is the policy of the state on sexual harassment? The state shall value the dignity of every individual, enhance the development of each human resources, guarantee full respect for human rights, and uphold the dignity of workers, employees, applicants for employment, students, or those undergoing training, instruction, or education. Towards this end, all forms of sexual harassment in the employment, education, or training environment are hereby declared unlawful. What is sexual harassment in a work-related education or training environment? Work, education, or training-related sexual harassment is committed by an employer, employee, manager, supervisor, agent, or the employer, teacher, instructor, professor, coach, trainer, or any other person who having authority, influence, or moral ascendancy over another in a work or training or education environment demands, requests, or otherwise requires any sexual favor from the other, regardless of whether the demand, request, or requirement for submission is accepted by the object of said act. Ang sexual harassment ay ang sapilitang paghingi o paghiling o pag-utos at iba pa ng sexual na pabor mula sa iba. Regardless kung tinanggap niya ang pabor o hindi, nagko-constitute pa rin ng sexual harassment. Elements of sexual harassment in a work-related education or training environment. Number 1, the offender is an employer, employee, manager, supervisor, agent of the employer, or any other person. Number 2, such offender has authority, influence, or moral ascendancy over another in a work or training or education environment. 3, the offender demands, requests, or otherwise requires any sexual favor from the other, regardless of whether such demand, request, or requirement for submission is accepted by the object of said act. So, hindi importante dito na tinanggap ng biktima o tinanggihan niya as long as humingi yung isang tao ng hiling o pag-uutos sa iba ay sexual harassment na yun. When is sexual harassment committed in the employment or work-related environment? The sexual favor is made as a condition in the hiring or in the employment, re-employment, or continued employment of said individual, or in granting said individual favorable compensation, terms, conditions, promotions, or privileges, or the refusal to grant the sexual favor results in limiting, segregating, or classifying the employee, which in any way would discriminate, deprive, or diminish employment opportunities or otherwise adversely affect said employee. Una, yung sexual na pabor, ginagawa siyang kondisyon for the employment of a person. Pwede rin na tinanggihan mo yung sexual na pabor. Mababawasan ka ng mga oportunidad sa opisina o sa iyong trabaho. Maaari din naman na sexual harassment ay nagdudulot ng paglabag ng mga karapatan ng empleyado sa ilalim ng batas sa paggawa o kaya naman kahit ano ay hindi magiging komportable yung biktima, magko-constitute pa rin sa sexual harassment. When is sexual harassment committed in the employment or work-related environment? The above acts would impair the employee's rights or privileges under existing labor laws, or the above acts would result in an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment for the employee. When is sexual harassment committed in the employment or work-related environment? You have here the example. A, an employee of B's company, is slated for promotion. B, however, told A he would not promote her unless she gives in to his sexual advances. A refused. B did not promote her. This is plain and simple sexual harassment because her refusal to grant the sexual favor resulted in depriving her or her employment opportunity. So ang sabi ni B na boss sa company, gusto mo bang ma-promote? Opo sir, sagot naman ni A. Pero may kasunod na kahilingan. Pagsasama ka sa akin, makukuha mo ang posisyon na gusto mo. Pag umayaw si A, hindi niya makukuha ang promotion. Sa kagustuhan niya na maabot ang pangarap na makuha ang promotion, sumama si A kay B. Sexual harassment na yun. O kahit hindi siya sumama sa request ni B, magko-constitute pa rin sa sexual harassment. When is sexual harassment committed in an education or training environment? Education or training related sexual harassment is committed when against one is under the care, custody, or supervision of the offender, against one whose education, training, apprenticeship, or tutorship is entrusted to the offender. Ito naman ang laban sa biktima na nasa pangangalaga o kustodiya, supervision ng offender, o laban sa biktima ang pag-aaral o pagsasanay ay pinagkatiwala sa offender. When is sexual harassment committed in an education or training environment? When the sexual favor is made a condition to the giving of a passing grade or the granting of honors and scholarships or the payment of a stipend, allowance, or other benefits, privileges, or considerations, or when the sexual advances result in an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment for the student, trainee, or apprentice. Kung ang sexual na pabor o kondisyon para bigyan ka ng scholarship o allowance or ano pa mga benepisyo, magko-constitute pa rin ng sexual harassment. Meron ding sexual harassment sa kahit anong sitwasyon as long as hindi magiging komportable yung biktima. Sa ganitong sitwasyon, depende sa circumstances, as long as yung biktima hindi siya komportable, pwede siyang mag-file ng sexual harassment. Who can violate anti-sexual harassment law? Anyone who directly commits prohibited acts, whether female or male, can be punished under the law. Also, anyone who persuades or aids others to carry out such acts may also be liable to law. Pwedeng babae at pwede rin ang lalaki na maakusahan ng sexual harassment. What are the forms of sexual harassment? 1. Physical sexual harassment. And under physical sexual harassment, A. Malicious touching. In malicious touching, example nito ay ang paghawak sa balikat o ang pag-akbay, ang paghaplos sa buhok, ang paghawak sa kamay, pangingiliti, pangangalabit sa maselang bahagi ng katawan. B. Overt sexual advances. C. Gestures with lewd insinuation, like middle finger gestures. Number 2, verbal sexual harassment, such as but not limited to requests or demands for sexual favors and lurid remarks. Example, naglalakad ka at may nagsabi ng, "Hi, sexy!" Or, isang halimbawa pa ay ang verbal request for sexual favor. Number 3, non-verbal sexual harassment. Use of objects, pictures, or graphics, letters, or written notes with sexual underpinnings. Non-verbal example, whistling o manpiuos. Meron din kung tumingin pataas pababa na parang elevator ang mata. following or stalking someone. Facial expressions like winking, manginkindat, throwing kisses, man-flying kiss, or licking lips, man-dil-dil na dilato, or bibil to. And also, pagpo-post ng mga malaswang larawan. Duty of the employer or head of office in a work-related education or training environment. It shall be the duty of the employer or the head of the work-related educational or training environment or institution to prevent or deter the commission of acts of sexual harassment and to provide the procedures for the resolution, resettlement, or prosecution of acts of sexual harassment. Duty of the employer or head of office in a work-related education or training environment. The employer or head of office shall promulgate appropriate rules and regulations in consultation with and jointly approved by the employees or students or trainees through their duly designated representatives, prescribing the procedure for the investigation of sexual harassment cases and the administrative sanctions. Therefore, administrative sanctions shall not be a bar to prosecution in the proper courts for unlawful acts of sexual harassment. The said rules and regulations issued pursuant to this subsection A shall include, among others, guidelines on proper decorum in the workplace and educational or training institution. Magtakda ng proseso upang imbestigahan ang mga kaso ng sexual harassment. Duty of the employer or head of office in a work-related education or training environment. Create a committee on decorum and investigation of cases on sexual harassment. The committee shall conduct meetings as the case may be with officers and employees, teachers, instructors, professors, coaches, trainers, and students or trainees to increase understanding and prevent incidents of sexual harassment. It shall also conduct the investigation of alleged cases constituting sexual harassment. Bumuo ng Committee on Decorum and Investigation na tatanggap ng mga reklamo patungkol sa sexual harassment. Duty of the employer or head of office in a work-related education or training environment. In case of a work-related environment, the committee shall be composed of at least one representative each from the management, the union if any, the employees from the supervisory rank, and from the rank and file employees. In the case of the educational or training institution, the committee shall be composed of at least one representative from the administration, the trainers, teachers, instructors, professors or coaches, and students or trainees as the case may be. The employer or head of office, educational or training institution shall disseminate or post a copy of this act for the information of all concerned. What are the legal What then are the legal remedies against sexual harassment? The offended party may opt to file an administrative action against the offender pursuant to Section 4. The offended party may file an administrative case against the offender depending on where the offender is employed. So if the offender is employed in a company, let's say he is a manager of that company, then that is where the offended party can file an administrative case against him or her. Or if the offender is a teacher in a school, then that is the place where the offended party should file an administrative case. Or if the offender is a coach in a training institution, then that is the place where the offended party should file an administrative action against the erring party. Now, take note that administrative sanctions imposed by the company or by the school or by the training institution shall not be a bar to prosecution in the proper courts for unlawful acts of sexual harassment. Because the offended party, even if he or she had already filed an administrative case against the offended party can still file an independent action for damages against the offender pursuant to Section 6 of RA 7877. This is a civil case for damages, regardless of whether a criminal case for sexual harassment or an administrative case for sexual harassment had already been filed. Precisely why it's called independent action now under Section 5. The employer or head of office of the company or educational or training institution will be solidarily liable with the offender arising from the acts of sexual harassment committed in the employment, education, or training environment if the employer or head of office of the educational or training institution is informed of such acts by the offended party and no immediate action is taken. And of course, the offended party can file a criminal action for sexual harassment under Section 7. The imposable penalty if the offender is found guilty is imprisonment of not less than 1 month nor more than 6 months, or a fine of not less than 10,000 nor more than 20,000 pesos, or both such fine and imprisonment at the discretion of the court. What about the prescriptive period for actions arising from acts of sexual harassment? According to the law, the prescriptive period is 3 years from the alleged commission of such violation. Any complaint arising from this act should be filed within 3 years prescriptive period. Thank you for listening.